Welcome to the Silverthorne Pulse. I'm Kim Jardim with the town of Silverthorne, and I'm here today with Town Manager Ryan Highland. Thanks for being here, Ryan.
Hi, Kim.
We're here to recap the council meeting from Wednesday, January 11th, 2023. So let's kick off first with work session, which occurs right before the town council meeting. And let's chat a little bit about a discussion that was had at the work session regarding remote participation in meetings, town council meetings specifically.
Yeah, we finally, after a lot of supply chain delays, some new equipment in the council chambers, so it was time to have council have a conversation about how they feel that would best be used in that setting. And so, short version is they really would like to use that for emergency purposes. And so not kind of a regular opportunity for council members to log in remotely. They really feel like they all need to be in the room. So it will be, we'll draft up a policy, come back to the next work session that they can look that over and formally adopt. But really the gist of it is, we've had scenarios before where you've got a meeting that needs to happen. We've got a fire on Ptarmigan, and you need to do, a disaster declaration or something. And you could have a scenario where you've got 3 council members out of town. And so they would like to reserve the use of remote access for situations like that, emergency situations. Or other situations where you might have, you don't have a quorum, and let's say we have to get a resolution approved to submit for a grant or something that's really timely. So not for the convenience of council members, but for those types of situations. So we'll come back in a couple weeks and run a policy by them and get that formalized.
Great. There was also a discussion, I understand, about just a follow-up of citizen comments from the December council meeting. And can you speak to what those were about?
Yeah, there were some comments at the last meeting and some general discussion with staff and council about fire station in Silverthorne. And so we talked a bit about that. There was also some conversation about the fire at the home that was under construction in Three Peaks. And so the conversation about the fire station, we're working with the fire district. I think we might have mentioned last time they did approve in their budget funds to go ahead and construct that station. And so we had a little bit of conversation about the town's role, and obviously we'll be working closely with them because we will be the land use review agency. So we shared with council that we've got a meeting scheduled this month for the pre-application meeting, which is where that's the first look where we all get around the table and planners and fire staff are looking at what they're proposing and kind of just the kickoff to that land use review process. So town's committed to making sure that we can do that quickly so that we certainly don't hold up any construction or anything that they need to do. We've got full staff in our planning department right now, which is great. So we've got the ability to work quickly on that. There was some conversation about some of the things that were raised by the public with respect to that fire at the construction site. And we did have the chief, I'll just jump ahead a little bit, the Chief Davis from Summit Fire joined at the regular meeting and provided some updates as well. So I'll just kind of cover those here as well. Some questions from the public about why didn't you have lights and sirens going when you responded to that? And so the chief identified kind of some of their protocols, and they use those in some situations and not in others. They don't want to startle folks unnecessarily. And so in that particular case, they really didn't need them to manage traffic getting up to the house, so they didn't do that. Some questions also were raised at the prior meeting from the public about why wasn't there a reverse 911 call? So the chief also addressed that. Not a situation that called for reverse 911. They felt that the adjacent neighbors weren't in immediate danger, with the exception of the one home that they did have to put water on, but that didn't warrant a reverse 911 to the whole area. So some clarifications from the chief there. Additionally, he clarified the response time. There had been some question there. They did have a very slight delay because one of the first 911 calls identified the address of the golf course clubhouse, and so they have to pull in there per their protocol to take a quick look. Some conversation about that, and I think we're pleased at where the fire district is. I think we've mentioned before, another upcoming meeting that we've scheduled is with the town's professional grant writers, and offering those services to the fire district so that they can hopefully secure some grant funding for this as well. So I think those were the main items.
Great. As we move into the actual town council meeting itself, it kicked off with executive session at the beginning of the meeting, and there were several items discussed in the executive session. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think we had 4 items, 3 of which were, I'd say, related to workforce housing on a number of different properties that we're talking to folks about, and then a 4th item related to the road connection that will be the neighborhood-to-neighborhood connection between Smith Ranch and Willowbrook, and some work on that. So those were the 4 items that we hit in the exec session.
Excellent. And then always a fun night when there's a promotion being recognized. Sergeant Brian Siebel was promoted last night to senior sergeant within the police department. And
yeah, when we were last here at the table, we talked about some other promotions and recognitions, and one of our sergeants is retiring. He's still with us in a different position as an evidence tech, but that does mean that Brian Siebel is now the senior sergeant in Silverthorne. You get that title for being the longest serving, and then also having an accomplished career. So yeah, it was
23
great.
years.
23 years, yeah.
23 years for Brian. So yes,
and it was great.
fantastic. Congratulations to him.
Yeah.
And so then we move into consent calendar, and there were a number of items on the consent calendar last night, beginning with tow contracts.
Yeah, we had A through G. It was a big consent calendar. Tow contract, just a standard thing that we do. So when our folks, when our officers are on scene and need a tow, there's just a protocol in who we call and how we do that. So standard stuff there. Once a year, we notify the public on where we officially post our agendas, and so we do that on our website, and also some physical locations, including town hall. So just a routine thing there. Mm-hmm. We talked a little last time about the town's lease of the old Green Village parking lot and making sure we can keep that public until they redevelop. So that was approved. So a little bit of opioid settlement funds will be coming to the town. It's pretty minimal, but we will have agreed to pool those together with the rest of the entities in the county, and Summit County Public Health is going to be doing some programs related to awareness there. Then another thing we talked about last time was approved the Joint Sewer Authority, which Silverthorne manages, and then a lot of other local entities are partners in, and adding some capacity allowances for growth in the communities that are still conservative and not getting anywhere near the actual capacity ultimately of that plant.
So that's a result too of some of the development going on in our town, right? Like in terms of capacity. Yeah.
Interestingly, I think Silverthorne still has quite a bit of capacity. We weren't really the ones that were driving the need here. It was more some of the unincorporated areas that were bumping up against their allotments, at least their allotments on paper. And so the actual plant has more capacity. So it wasn't a result of anything going on in Silverthorne, more, up in Buffalo Mountain, Metro, that area.
Okay, great.
And then the last thing we've got, we're always working on our infrastructure. We've got some sewer line and water line upgrades that'll be coming along Highway 9 this spring and summer, and so awarding a contract for that.
Excellent. And as we moved into public hearings, there was the second reading regarding the short-term rental ordinance that has been proposed. And it's my understanding that that passed.
That did. 4-1 passage there. We had one council member with an excused absence, so that's why it was only 5 members voting on that one. And as a reminder, we've mentioned before, the mayor doesn't vote unless there's a tie. So,
Right.
But she did voice her support, even though she didn't have a vote. So last night was really the culmination of 6+ months of work on short-term rental, conversation with the council and the community. We had mentioned when we were talking about first reading, 1,400 responses to the town survey, and ultimately the majority of council determined that some caps were appropriate. So I know we've shown the map before, we can show it again. 10% zone for the majority of town, but then up to 50% of residences can be short-term rentals in the town core and the riverfront. So
Right.
that's really where a lot of the newer construction is. But
So we know that second reading means that it's passed,
Right,
it's done. When is that effective?
So it's effective now. I think it's a different scenario than in a lot of other communities where it's effective, but essentially with the room that we have before you hit those caps, doesn't really change anything right now. There's a lot of room for growth in the 10 and the 50% zones. So if people are interested in a short-term rental license, they're available. And I think we mentioned last time we have, 303 licenses right now, and that's cumulative in the 10 and 50 zones. And the cap doesn't hit until around 700 plus. So,
Right.
we're at 30-some% of the capacity.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So action items. The town owns a property in town that it is selling. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, residential property in the Arctic Placer neighborhood. Our strategic housing plan identifies a number of different tools for workforce housing, and buy downs are identified in there. This is the town's first official buy down, and so that is where we purchase the residential property, and then our purchase price was whatever the market value was. Then we reduce that by about 15%, and then offer it up with a deed restriction so that in perpetuity that particular home can only be purchased by someone who's in the workforce. And the traditional got to be working in the county 30 hours or more per week. So that's our first buy down. Like I said, we've got a lot of different strategies. We're building things at Smith Ranch, but buy down is one of the opportunities.
A lot of good things happening in town, especially regarding workforce housing.
Yeah, certainly.
For sure. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We'll be back for the second January meeting, and we'll see you next time.